Welcome to the Elevated Entrepreneur. I'm your host, as always, Raylan Davis. With me is my good friend, business partner, and also a sales coach, Kyle Brewer. Welcome, Kyle, to the podcast.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, buddy.
Yeah, of course. One of the things that part of the reason why I wanted you on the podcast in general was because of your sales prowess. And look, one of the things I've realized, I think, over time is that, like, when I first started out in entrepreneurship, that was my thing. I was a sales coach. And I realized because I got involved in so many other facets of entrepreneurship, sales just kind of went to the wayside. So one of the things that we did, obviously recently, is we partnered up to help people with their sales. But maybe start with this, because I've realized that sales is still, in my opinion, one of the most important skill sets. Not even just entrepreneurs, but people in general need to have. So maybe start with like the journey of like, what was your first sales job? Like, how did you even get into sales in the first place?
Yeah, great question. I think, like a lot of people that got into sales, I didn't
Kyle,
know
I
that
know it's a
sales.
good question. I know it's a great
Well,
question because
I'm sure
run
I'm
this
sure it's the
podcast.
first
All
time
right,
that
that's all I
anybody's
do
ever
here.
actually told you that. Yeah. Make that ego a little bit bigger. That's probably why you let sales go by the wayside, right? You carried over the ego a little too much. No, but I didn't know sales was a
Yes.
career, man. I didn't even know sales was a career. Kind of jumped into it, got into it after college, but I think all of us throughout our entire lives, we're always selling something, right? We're always talking about something. We just don't know it's actual sales, and we don't know a lot of the skill set and a lot of the attributes that go into it is, sales. You have a young kid right now. I have young kids. They're negotiating with us every single step of the way, whether it's an extended bedtime, whether it's more snacks, more treats, whatever it might be. So when you actually finally do get into that first sales role, you start thinking back that you've actually had a lot of these interactions. You just didn't know that you're actually selling yourself or going to be selling a product and service. I didn't even get in. First like real sales jobs was 22, but I started selling, memberships and gym memberships when I was, a teenager, trying to make extra money. But I definitely did not know what kind of career it could actually provide, and the earning potential that it can create for people.
So what's really funny, I think we've gone over this before, but that's how I kind of got started in sales in the first place, was doing gym sales. I don't know if I ever told you that.
No, I
So
did
one of
not
the
know
first
that.
things I
But
did was, so in high school, so let me back up. So my first job ever was in high school, 16, and I started working for this place called Present Tuxedo. And I was selling like tuxedos, and mainly it was like during prom season or whatever. Like I was just getting people sign up for
just
tuxes and
hustle.
stuff. But then, yeah, it was just like, it was just kind of something I wanted to do and make some extra, side money or whatever. Didn't really view it as sales then. It was just kind of, it was like customer service. There was no selling. They
Hmm.
came in, if you come into a tux place, like you need a tux. So there's no sales
Hmm.
really happening. But when later on, I again wanted some extra income. So I got another job. And that other job was working for 24 Hour Fitness, which I think is now LA Fitness. And what was funny was I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be good at sales. I don't know why, but I was like, I don't think I'll be good at sales, like whatever. And I took this job and I became obsessed with the psychology of sales.
Hmm.
Like it fit me very well, because it's like with fitness, selling gym memberships, a lot of it was just selling the dream outcome. I didn't realize that's what I was doing. But, already it was, this thing of asking, because we didn't have any like templates or sales guides or anything like
Hmm.
that. It was just like, my manager at the time was like, yo, call these people and get them in. And I was like, all right. And then so when I was calling them, in kind of like smiling and dialing, so to speak, one of the first things I kind of stumbled across was like, what do you want? It was like my favorite question. Like, you put your information in for me to call you. Why are you looking into signing up for a gym? Like, what do you want? And then I remember specifically there's this guy that was like, he kept dodging me. He didn't want to ever come to the gym. And so finally, but the funny thing is, and you've probably come across these like prospects before, where they still answer the phone for some reason. Like they still answer
They
and they
still want to
talk to
talk
you
to
and
you.
they tell you
Yeah,
they're going to
they
come in,
still
they
want to
don't
be
come in.
heard.
Yeah. And so finally I get him on the phone again, and I go, listen, man, like you've no-showed 3 tours. What's the deal? Like, let me ask you this. Why did you even want to sign up for a gym membership in the first place? and he was talking about how he went to the park with his son, and he was like out of breath. And he was like, if I want to be able to spend time with my son, like this is important to me. And again, here I am. I'm 20, early 20s, and Kyle, like the cojones on me, bro. I go, it doesn't sound like you actually care about your son all that much. That's not like, it doesn't sound like that to me. And he goes, what are you talking about? And I go, well, you haven't been in, which means that every time you go to the park, either A, you're not taking your son to the park, or B, you're still out of breath. How much fun is your son going to have, and how are you going to explain to him when you can't go to the gym, you can't go to the park, hey, I've been skipping going to the gym, and that's why I can't hang out with you. I can't go to the park. The next day he was in. But again, what I stumbled across was that thing of like, oh, sales, my favorite part of the sale isn't the objection of like it's too expensive. It's the limiting beliefs that get in the way of the sale, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we overcomplicate sales all the time, but it's you literally just change, right? It's just somebody taking a step forward. It's somebody taking a step to the right, to the left, and it's just making that change. And in all of our lives, what I tell people when I'm coaching them or talking to them about sales, I always ask them, like, what type of buyer are you? Right? Like, how do you buy things, right? There's very few things in our life that, we might just pick up and we automatically know we're buying it. Maybe Apple, because they locked us into, the iOS and the system. But like, besides that, like, we are very analytical, and most of us do not buy stuff on the first time or buy stuff on the first or second call. It generally takes a relationship, and the people who have the closest relationships with us generally challenge us the most, right? So for that person you're talking about, it might have been the third, fourth, fifth call, but you guys might have talked about a lot of other stuff you didn't think was important. And then it finally got to the point where it's like, oh, I trust Orlando as an authority. I trust him to come in and actually say, like, dude, like, get off your ass, go do this, right? And you're absolutely right. It is a sales psychology portion of it. I was a part of a coaching program, and this happened a few weeks ago. Right, one of the questions was, hey, who would you die for? Right, like who in your close group of friends or in your life are people you would actually die for? And come down to it, it's like intermediate family, very close thing. Like even like your closest friends, you're still like, well, it's not my kid or like my wife, right? And then you wrote out your list and you went through that, and then next thing you know, they hit you with it's like, okay, well, who would you live for, right? And you like sit there and it's like, dang, like that's pretty profound. It's like, you do all these things every single day, and you do the unhealthy options, whatever it might be, but it's like, hey, look, I'm willing to die, but I'm not willing to live or willing to do that little extra to put me ahead of the game, to spend more time with my kids, or to whatever it is, right? So when you're starting to think about those consequence questions in sales, those are a huge driving factor to get somebody to take action, because you don't necessarily always think about the consequence because you're living your life in the status quo. You don't realize, like, hey, look, if you live your life in the status quo enough, something's going to happen, something's going to implode, and you're going to be behind the eight ball very quickly. And you're going to be thinking to yourself, wow, if I would have done this 6 months ago, right? You start living in the what if. And you're absolutely right. Like when you get to that point, you challenge them. You're like, hey, look, like if this really mattered to you, you would be in here. You would change this, right? Like if you don't do this thing, like you came in because you're breathing, like what's it going to be in 6 months for you?
Yeah. So do you think, like, I think another huge component of sales that's so important that I realized later on was the ability to have difficult conversations. Mm-hmm. Like when I started like in sales, again, it was fitness, so it was okay. Like it didn't seem that dire. But then when I moved on to selling like educational programs, there were even more hard conversations that I had to have. And some of those hard conversations were in theory could get in the way of me making the sale. So like, for example, it's like you have to ask those questions. Okay, if this happens in your life, what are you going to do? Explain to me how you're going to make sure that doesn't get in your way of continuing on with our partnership or whatever. But like, I remember when I first started asking that question, it was so nerve wracking. Well, hell, even like, I remember I was having a really hard time asking for money, because also like, I think your experience before you start sales, I think that's like that self-awareness is so key, because I didn't come for money. So I remember when I was asking, I was hesitating to ask for the transaction, because in my head, I'm like, this is a lot of money. Like I couldn't, so I had it in my head that I couldn't afford this. So because I can't afford this, you probably can't. And then I remember my mentor at the time, shout out to Vince Garcia. He was my mentor, the first like started training me on sales. And he goes, listen to my words, how I'm saying it, and just repeat exactly what I said. It's going to be this today. Your investment's going to be this today. Would that be cash or card? And then you shut up. And then I was like, okay, I'll do it. And then I did it. And I remember the first time they're like, oh, card. And they just handed it over. And I was like, oh my God. So I didn't realize how much my like past was like getting in the way of me making the sale. But I guess like, did you have any trouble like having those difficult conversations, or am I an asshole and just like crazy?
No,
did
I
you
mean,
have like trouble with those?
no, this is why this is such a good conversation, you bringing this up, right? Because we talk about sales psychology, but we're always talking about the psychology of our prospect, and we're not actually always talking about the psychology of ourselves, right? And you're big on mindset, right? And that's kind of like, how relationships started off. Um, I I was I had so much phone anxiety and so much anxiety when I first got into sales. And it's because those conversations weren't prevalent to me growing up, because I grew up in a very tough environment and situation too. Right. So like the money conversations we had were, where's the money going to come from? Like, how are we going to eat the next week? Or really how we're going to make ends meet, all that
Mhm.
stuff. Right. But besides that, like, we didn't really like didn't hear other conversations around money or opening and talking about it. And I think just in general in our society, like a lot of people didn't talk about the exchange of goods or the exchange of money. So I got into sales, like those conversations were very difficult as well. Right. But like what really helped me was, right, like I'm a relationship builder by heart, right? Like even like, us, like, I'm always trying to build value, do stuff for people before I ever ask for anything in return, right? And I'm always a huge believer the closest people in your life that you have relationships with, you can challenge them the most, right? There might be something that I
Mhm.
say that doesn't necessarily resonate with you, but then Kayla might bring something up and you're like, dang, like, we've gone through it, we've had the relationship, we've gone back and forth, right? And it allows for those challenging moments and those challenging experiences, right? And then once I, figured out how to start maneuvering those conversations and really going through it, I had to realize like I had to separate myself from a sale, right? And I think that's one of the the biggest things people struggle with in sales is like they have commission on their mind. They have a deal on their mind. They have what that could pay off. They have what that can get them, all those different things. But you're not helping the person that you're actually in a sales process with. Right? You're not helping the person that actually could use this product and service. Right. So you're not listening with intent. You're not trying to guide them with intent. You're not trying to ask questions with a rationale and intent with them in mind. And you have to separate those two things. And you have to separate the outcome of the deal, because what happens a lot of times when you're afraid to challenge somebody is because you're afraid to lose the deal, right? And you don't have a
Yeah.
deal until it's signed on the dotted line, until you actually go through implementation. And the day that I started realizing that was the day that I felt more free. And I felt like I could have more open conversations and I could challenge people more, because at the end of the day, if like the question I'm asking you is what set you off and what set you over the edge and what forced you to be upset, like if that's all it did, like odds are you weren't going to sign up with me or work with me in the first place, right? And if you can't answer
Mhm.
those questions and actually be honest with yourself, what kind of customer are you going to be, and what kind of person are you going to be as far as a client, as far as us actually trying to get you results and trying to implement our services or systems or products or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I think I got a little bit lucky at the time. I didn't see this as like luck. I didn't well, also didn't really know what I was missing out on. But my first big boy sales job wasn't commission. It was a sales job. Now, granted, when I first started, like I was making $47,000 a year, but it didn't matter if I sold $1 million worth of programs. That's what I
Mm-hmm.
was going to make, and just because I was in for profit higher education, so there's a lot of like commission like issues, whatever. So you couldn't get commission. But
Yeah.
I think the reason why I say that I got lucky is because I didn't have that, oh, if I land this sale, I'm gonna hit bonus, I'm gonna do whatever. It was just purely I want to get as good as I can at this craft. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not gonna like if I lose this sale, my check's still the same. So I'm gonna push this person to do whatever's best interest for them. Um, but on the flip side, the moment that I realized that I kind of like, man, I could make way more money in other things. Is I remember I went to my boss and we're going. She was like, "Hey, you did a really really good job," and I was like, "Well, how much money did I bring in for the company?" And in this particular instance, I think I brought in like $3 or $4 million in 10 weeks. And it was when she said that I realized, I'm like, wait, and I only make $47,000. Like, wait a minute, like
Yeah.
something's fucking off here. Like, this doesn't make sense. And that's when I made the decision to become a manager, because there was not a lot. There was a cap to how much you can make in my industry. There was a cap to how much you can make as a rep, and so I was like, all right, I want to make more money, so I want to become a manager. What do I got to do to become a manager? So I guess like the next question for you is like, what was that transition like for you from rep to manager? Because again, that's something that we share in our love for developing sales managers, sales leaders in general. So like, what was that? When did you realize that you want to be a manager versus a rep?
Yeah, I knew I wanted to be in leadership. I mean, ever since a young age, right? All my sports teams, every team I played on, I was fortunate enough to be, named captain by my peers, or just taking additional leadership roles. So I knew very early on in my career I wanted to move into leadership. And I'd say it's one of my first phone sales jobs. I was actually doing like third-party logistics and brokerage. I had a really, really, really good boss, who took everybody under his wing, would do anything for them, really guided, helped develop my career. And just watching how he moved and how he acted, I knew I wanted to help other people who struggled and other people like overcome those challenges and overcome those humps. Um, I'd say when I finally became a leader, like it was a pretty easy transition because I had a lot of respect within my peer group, but there's also a lot of challenging things and a bunch of challenging, instances you'd run across. I think the biggest challenge I really faced, and this is something you could probably talk to as well in like your coaching business, but like I had a problem where I cared about people's results more than they cared about the results. Right.
Mm.
So I would almost, take their career, put it on my shoulders. And I was like, how do I get you to 100,000? How do I get you to a 200,000? And I was putting way too much pressure on myself to get them there. And they weren't doing enough to help themselves get there. So I really had to like play that back a little bit. And I really struggle with thinking that every single person had the same mentality and wanted the same things, right? Just because I wanted to, grow and advance and, help other people and make a ton of money doesn't mean that that's everybody else's driving motivators and factors. And that's something I really, really struggled with, was realizing not everybody's an A player, but that's okay, because, B players and other players have, great roles on the team. You just had to set them up and put them in, situations where they can be successful.
Yeah, that's such a big learning lesson that like not everybody wants the same thing. But I think going back to like your initial thing of leadership, what's interesting is like in sports, I was the captain of my wrestling team from like my junior year, or maybe even, I think I was a captain maybe even my sophomore year even. And then football, same thing, I was a captain. But the funny thing is, I wasn't a leader in the sense of like, I was a leader, but it wasn't like in my head, I thought a leader like gave the speech and did all these things. I just happened to be good. And I remember my coach at the time was like, you're a captain because of how you show up. Like people would just follow you. So you're a captain because of that. You know what I mean? And so then I realized, oh, that's okay. Like I thought I had to give this big speech every fucking game, like whatever. I thought that was a leader, but I didn't. What's funny is, moving on to like when I got my sales job, I didn't realize that I wanted to be a leader until I had my final interview with the VP of sales. And he asked me, what do I, essentially like, what goals do I have? And I said, I want your job. I didn't like, it just came out. Like, I was just like, I want your job. And then all of a sudden, like, I was like, oh wait, I think I do want to be a leader.
Felt good.
And then again,
Yeah.
it was one of those things where like, I was like, oh no, this feels, and then naturally, but again, it was one of those things naturally for me where I started like coaching. And so I think this is something too we can dive into a little bit, is that difference between like managing versus coaching. Because my style of leadership was, let me help you get to your highest potential. And so I remember even in my corporate job, I would, I talk shit a lot. So I would call like the camp, the location that was over in the East Coast, because we always battle like, who's number one. And I would call them on the phone. And I was like, dude, this is like, and again, I'm fortunate. I don't know how I had friends at this company, because literally I would call. He was the number one rep, had been for years. And 3 weeks in, bro, I'm like, just so you know, I'm coming for you. And like he was like, who is this? I'm like, it's Raylan from Phoenix. I just started, but just so you know, like, have fun at number one. It's not gonna happen very long. And then the next month I was number one, and then I just kept talking shit. But then the other thing that happened was I would also reach out to other campuses, that other locations, and go, hey, do you need help? Like, hey, I'm trying this new thing and it started working. So, and I was always coaching people. And then I realized, oh, that's my style of leadership. Like, I'm just going to coach you to get as best as you could. And, I guess, for you, what is that management style that you feel like works the best in sales? Because for me, I tried other leadership styles. I kind of mimicked what other people did. But to be honest with you, I feel like most sales managers manage the process and they don't coach the people. And then they get mad and go, well, why aren't you hitting your numbers? Well, because all you're doing is telling the fucking person, hey, you were supposed to get 5 sales today and you didn't. Let's, what the hell? Do better. Like, what?
Yeah. No, no, and it's very true. And this is one of the problems I see most organizations having, right? And this is, one of the biggest reasons we're partnering together. We really want to bring a coaching culture and environment to these teams. Because I can almost say too, and like I've had so many great mentors in my, career, and I'm very blessed that they've taken an interest in my life and really helped me, move forward. But a lot of these companies don't offer leadership development programs. They don't offer, coaching programs, or really teach us how to get in the weeds and actually, help somebody reach their potential or really get, something out of them. It's turned into an environment where, it's so, data driven. It's so dashboard driven, where the conversations are really staying surface level. And it's just like, hey, Raylan, I realize you made this many calls or you talked to this many people. Why don't you have more deals? Instead of like, hey, look, walk me through your conversations, walk me through what's going on, walk me through what you feel like is going really well. Why do you feel like that? And you're actually getting into a conversation where you're asking for their opinion and their feedback. My leadership style has always been, it's always been a very much, Chris Voss puts it great, in his book when he talks about negotiation. It's a collaboration, right? So every interaction I'm having with one of my employees or one of my team members is a collaboration of where they're currently at, where they currently want to go, and how we can both help each other get there. And then it's building that relationship and moving it forward. I always tell people, in micromanagement, like it'll give you a short it'll give you a pretty quick uptick, but it'll die out very quickly, a month, 2 months, 3 months later, because the reps will get burnt out and the person actually micromanaging will actually get burnt out as well. Right. And that's what happens with a lot of these companies when you're looking at numbers, when you're looking at metrics, and you're not actually diving into those coaching conversations. But mine has always been a collaboration, an open door policy where we're going to have conversations, we're going to communicate. It's okay to wear your emotions on your sleeve if you need to, and that's how you, move forward. But it's creating an environment and a culture where you can be open with your needs and you can be open with your criticism and your feedback and all those different things. That's where I'm going to get the most out of somebody, and that's where I feel like somebody shines the most. And then also too, I mean, we kind of talked about with a prospect having those tough conversations. It's easy for me to have tough conversations with my teams over the years because we have so much respect and we've had so much collaboration. They already know if they're doing things the right way and if they're not doing things the right way, and they can already look in the mirror before I even come in and have a conversation with them because the expectations are there and they're so clear and they're so set. And it's kind of what you're saying too, like you got to lead from the back, but you have to lead from the front as well. Right? Like you gotta know when you're setting expectations and you gotta know when you need to show expectations. I think those are two completely different things. And I feel like we're really good at sales managers at setting expectations, but not actually being clear and showing what you actually mean. Right. So, making phone calls, getting in the weeds with them, doing the things every single day you're talking about and allowing them to see how it actually will be done, or allowing them to see, what a really successful call looks like. A lot of people are afraid to do that because as sales leaders, we're afraid to be criticized. We're afraid for our team to think that we're not that good at something. We're afraid to lower our shield. But if you create that environment where it's okay to fail and you're willing to fail just alongside of them, and they understand that you're not going to go 100% on your sales calls, that collaboration, that environment will do wonders. Will do wonders to create a high performing team and a high performing culture. But it's really being emotionally intelligent with your people and allowing them to be themselves, right? And have complete 100% awareness in who they are. And once you create 100% awareness in those people, they're going to tell you right away, like what's wrong and what's not wrong before you have to guess what it is and what it isn't.
I think you make an interesting point, because I remember when I first became a manager, I was still doing a lot of, we call it writing, like you would still write business. So I was still writing business while I was coaching. And one of the things I realized was that me still writing business was hurting me as a leader. And the reason for that was because like I thought my skill set had to be only about selling versus helping you learn how to sell, because it's two different skill sets. And that's the thing I think managers, like new managers like myself at the time, don't understand, is that you have to be developing how can you coach somebody to be better versus you just constantly getting better and better at sales. Because like at the same time, like again, it's just something that I didn't realize I needed to work on at the moment. And then eventually when I stopped doing as many of those sales calls, stopped writing business as much, my coaching got better. And the reason why was because, again, not everyone's going to sell the same. So I would constantly train people on how to break down limiting beliefs, let's say. That was like one of my key things, is like identify the limiting beliefs, because it's probably not money, but identify the limiting belief. Because also, too, in what I was selling anyway, there was 1,000 different ways that they can purchase the educational program. Like there was no reason why anybody, unless you had like something crazy in your past life, like a bankruptcy or something like that, like there's no reason why you can't afford what we were doing. And so it was usually not money. It was just limiting beliefs, right? Like I'm too old, I'm too this, I'm too that. And so I really focused on that. But that was my style. And what I was coaching people on at the time, because my style was working, was how to do me. But what I didn't realize was, if you don't have the background as me, you can't tell the same stories. Because a lot of my selling style was like, I'd ask a question, but I would persuade by telling a story. And that story would build trust. It would, showcase, my generosity or my expertise in the subject matter. But most importantly, it would be the empathy. Like, hey, I get where you're coming from, but I'm still here. And the reason why is because I made this step, and you can make this step too. But I realized that, like, if I was teaching people how to do that in my language, but it's not the same, right? There's no way that. So then I had to step back and go, okay, meeting you where you are, right? Like as a rep, what experiences have you had? All these things. And I think the other, important part that you kind of mentioned was also like, building that relationship, which again, I didn't really do well at the beginning. But I remember a moment where one of my employees, for whatever reason, always had an attitude. Performance wasn't there. This wasn't doing well. And she had an outburst in front of a bunch of people. And again, this is my learning lesson, an opportunity. I see the opportunity. I'm like, normally I would avoid this conversation, because again, at the time, I didn't like having confrontation. Which people that know me now are like, when they hear that, they're gonna be like, "What the fuck?" But like, I just really did not.
That's
like
all you
having
like.
difficult conversations. Now that's all I do. Yeah, like our newsletter is called Tough Love. Like that's all I do now. But so I pull her in my office, and I'm like, I sat down and I was like, "All right, I'm not your boss at this point. I'm confused. Like, help me understand what the hell's going on. Like, I don't understand. Like, listen." I was like, I need to come straight with you. I'm new at this. You just embarrassed me in front of all the other employees. Help me out. Like I don't know what just happened, but like I can't have this, and also like don't want to fire you. So like, what's going on? Well, she breaks down crying, and she was like, "Yeah, I'm not making enough money right now. I thought I was gonna hit this bonus. I thought I was gonna do this and that, and then I promised my kids that I'd buy them new shoes for school, and I can't afford it." And so I'm like, oh. And again, it sounds stupid now, but I'm like, I had this thing in my head where like you leave everything at the door. That's not possible. Okay.
At all.
And so, I did the most, you're not, by the way, if you're listening to this and you have somebody in your team that's struggling, do not do what I did because I didn't know it was illegal at the time. But I just handed over my card to her and I go buy your kids shoes. Like I was like, no, you don't owe me this money, whatever. I also have like a bit of a soft spot for single moms. So I was like, listen, like go and buy them nice shoes. Don't buy them. Do me a favor. And I was like, this is a personal thing. My mom used to do this. Don't take them to Goodwill. Don't go to TJ Maxx. Go to like Foot Locker and go buy them the shoes that they want to buy. Because my mom used to always, I wanted Timberlands and she bought me the knockoffs. Okay. So like do me the favor and go buy your kids whatever. Well, she's crying. We hug. Everything's fine. She ended up being my top employee. Any like initiative that I put out, she was like behind it, this, almost to the degree of like, it was like too much. Like she was like, whatever Raylan says, I could give out anything. She's like, she's in it. And then that's how I had that realization, like, oh, if I don't address what's going on at home with my employees, they're never going to be successful. Like they're just not. And they have you can teach, and you and I talk about this a lot, but you can teach the tactics all day. But if they don't know how to manage their life outside of work, they're gonna lose sleep. They're always gonna be stressed. And how can you expect them to perform? And not to mention, let's go back even to the phone conversations. If they're afraid to have difficult conversations, they'll never be successful. Well, where does that start? It starts at home. Do they struggle talking to their spouse when they do something wrong? Can I help you be more assertive in your life? Because if you can be more assertive in your life, like with some of our clients, one of the homework assignments I gave them, one of our employees struggles with being assertive. So I said, I'm going to challenge you in your personal life to bring up this difficult conversation that, you told me about, and you're going to do that today. And tomorrow we're going to meet, and you're going to tell me how it went. And I made her do this. This is a personal matter, but I knew if I don't get her to be assertive in her personal life, she'll never be able to do it at work.
So when you say the word assertive, do you think that word's like means being aggressive?
No, so like I assertive. I forgot which book I was reading, but he broke it down. I'm drawing a blank on it, but anyway, most people, and I've heard you talk about this as well. They think being aggressive, like I have to be pushy and do all this thing. So my definition of assertive, and by the way, this is not like a dictionary fucking term for it, but when I look at assertive, it's pushing the person, never the product. So can I challenge you the way that you look at the world, and can I bring what I want to the forefront? So like when we talk about personal life, when I challenge people to be assertive in their personal life, it's, can you have the wherewithal to go, this is what I want. This is the situation. Not even what I want. What I don't want. I don't want this situation anymore.
Yeah. Or what you stand for.
Say
right?
that. Yeah, like that's, to me, that's being assertive. But to your point and what you're bringing up now, I don't think people understand the difference between aggressiveness versus assertive.
Yeah, and that's why I asked it. I was just doing I did a presentation or a session like a month ago, and there was a room of like 50 sales reps. I asked them this question. I was like, do you feel like assertive? Like, what do you feel like when you hear that word? Like, does it feel comfortable to you? Do you feel like resounding? Everybody in the room felt that if you were being assertive, you were putting your deals at risk and you were being aggressive, right? And I think that's one of those things, kind of going back to what we're talking about is like there's so many learned behaviors that we pick up throughout our lives that really negatively affect how we communicate with people and how we communicate once we get into sales. And that's why I feel like there's such a learning curve when you get into sales. And a lot of stuff we're teaching you is like untraining you what societal beliefs or what you've dealt with in your life, right? Like even going back to talking about money, like we never talked about money in an open, positive way, right? Or like even, like with friends, right? Like you lend your friend $20, right? Like and it's like, hey, you're going to pay me Friday, right? And it's like, yeah. Like how many people will not ask for their $20 that they lent their friend, even though they had an agreement that I'll get it on Friday, because you're afraid to ask that friend for money because of what could happen, even though it's your $20, you lent it to them, you agreed on a date and time when you're going to get it back, but it's still uncomfortable in our society when it shouldn't be, because that's just a normal situation. That's a normal transfer. So the quicker you can get over that, the easier it's going to be for you to be successful in sales. But I bring back the assertive thing because that's what it is. It's like if you're not assertive in your personal life, like people are going to walk all over you, right? In your personal relationships or your parents or your significant other or whatever it is, right? So in sales, it's like if you disagree with something, you're building that relationship so you can easily say like, hey, look, like I understand where you're coming from, but have you thought about this? Right? Like, no, I understand what you're saying, but like, I actually disagree with this, and here's the reason why. Can you see this too? Right. And it's not assertive is not aggressiveness. And we need to kind of change that mold, because I still feel like there's a lot of sales coaching going on out there where it's teaching people to push their narrative. But then they're also afraid to challenge, and they're also afraid to be assertive in challenging somebody's way of thinking when that person could have been thinking that way for 20 years, but they could have been taught by other people that aren't thinking, more openly. But yeah, it is kind of
Well,
crazy
I
whenever
think
I
too,
ask people
like,
that.
yeah, I think the assertiveness is like having the wherewithal to even bring up something that normally you'd be
Hmm.
afraid to bring up. But then the aggressiveness is the behavior, is like the how you do it.
Yeah.
And I used to always talk about how I would rather you be a curious assertive, like curious and assertive, meaning like I'm gonna bring it up, but I'm gonna bring it up really dumb. So like for example, in the
Mm.
$20 example, right? Like just coming like confused and being like, well,
Yeah.
I could be wrong, Kyle, but I thought we said that you're gonna pay me back on Friday. Did I screw that up? And then it's like, no, but it's just I'm being assertive because I brought it up. You know
Hmm.
what I mean? But the way that
Yeah.
I always did it was this. Granted, and this is going back to like your style, right? I
Hmm.
think I developed this curiosity and this curiosity slash like I played stupid a lot because one of the things, and again, I think I'm growing out of it. I would imagine now because I'm like almost 30. But when I first started in sales, most of my clients were older than me.
Mm.
And so what I used to always do is just play stupid and go like, "Hey, why in the it's a question like this, right? Why in the world would you do this? Like, why would you buy this? Like, it's just like I don't get it." Like, and then I'd
Hmm.
have them explain to me the benefits of my own shit, right? And I still do this today because again, most of
Yeah.
our clients for our agency, they're older, and the same thing with like our consulting. Most of my clients have been in the industry 20, 30 years, and here I am 32 going, "Hey, I think you should do it differently." And they're like, "Well, what do you know?" Versus me going, "Hey, I'd just like, what do you think should be done differently?" "Oh, okay.
Hmm.
Well, what would that look like? Why would you do it that way?" "Oh, that's interesting. Okay. All right. By the
Hmm.
way, I can do that for you." It just worked for me. But again, this is where the coaching comes into play
Yeah.
because the way that you sell, Kyle, if I'm coaching you, I can't teach you that way because just because it worked for me doesn't mean it's going to work for you. It's kind of like I think that's why I've gotten so obsessed with coaching over the years is because I find this super interesting that like in sales and those meetings it was always like sports motivation. Like the Monday Stitch meeting was always like, let's get hyped for the week, right? But what's
Yeah.
funny is we failed in most scenarios that I've seen. We failed to learn the lesson from sports, which is how do you develop skills. And I remember I have to give a shout out to this company called Luxury Institute, which helped me develop the way that I manage. But their big thing was like they showed us like sports motivation stuff, but they also showed us how what's my man from Steve Curry.
Mm.
So they showed more importantly than him winning, they would show us videos of how he trained and they would showcase how he would take a complicated skill like dribbling up and down the court to this minutia, like this tiny little activity that would help him develop a small part
Hmm.
of the entire skill itself. And then it started helping me think about, okay, how am I coaching sales? Okay, and so instead of having you train the whole sales call, I'm going to have you work on that opening line over and over again until it becomes easy. Because if I can help you do that, or like finding that little thing of like, okay, talk about being assertive. If I can help you be assertive, I may not even have to train you on anything else in the sales process because that
Hmm.
may be the thing. You know what I mean? And so that's why like it's interesting to me how in sports or in sales culture we talk so much about sports, but very few people learn the lesson of the sport itself, which is how do you develop the skill and be professional at that, be an expert.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And, I mean, I'll say too, I mean, especially coming in sales, I mean, it's been, 15, 17 years now. I mean, we used to go into those meetings and those huddles and it was like this huge freaking, pump up fest. And it was like, all right, now get out there. And then like 5 minutes after leaving, everybody would already be, defeated,
Tired.
dejected. Yeah. Not knowing exactly what they're doing. Um, I've never been, I would say, one of those rah rah people. And that's why I'll go back to like that self awareness piece, right? It's like if you can get people to start being honest with themselves, right? Like just truly honest with themselves, right? It's like go back to the gym thing, or it's like, if I want to be, shredded and in shape, right? It's like I already know why I don't have a six pack is because I'm not going to the gym. I don't have enough discipline to do this, X, Y, and Z. And like all those people that are super successful or super fit, it's not that they love going to the gym every day. They have the discipline to do that because they're going to go get the thing that they want to go get. So if you can make people really be truly 100% real with themselves and transparent, it's going to be easier to coach skills and it's going to get it's going to be easier for them to get buy-in as far as what they want and what they want to accomplish. And if you truly do break down the skill and they have that, they're going to start feeling and telling you what feels comfortable and what feels uncomfortable very quickly. Right? Like in your mind, you know when you feel like something went 1,000% right, or you felt like it went 1,000% wrong, or a little bit wrong. And if you get people to start self-identifying like that in your business, in your job, in sales, whatever it might be, it's going to be a lot easier to build up that person very quickly and get them to move forward very quickly. Right? Like they know what a good phone call sounds like, even if it's their first day. They know if they feel like it went wrong. Now, do you have enough collaboration and enough trust where they're going to be like, hey, look, I really messed up on this. Let's look at this and let's get better together. Because I think you said something that, I've really focused on too is I'm trying to fix a little kink in the process. I'm not trying to fix the entire process. Right. And that's one thing that I'll tell you right now, and being in corporations and being in corporate America, that I completely disagree with. Right. Like I remember coming out and it's just like, hey, look, we got the 30, 60, 90. Like if you're not killing it by 90 days, like, we can separate your employment, whatever it is. And we're setting these people up and we're setting these salespeople up to fail before they even get started. And if you go into one job like that when you first get into sales, you never want to do sales ever again because it's so cutthroat. Right. And the ramp policy and the ramp programs that we have aren't necessarily setting these people up to succeed and actually teaching them how to sell or teaching them how to not sell like they did before and how to actually sell our products and services. And I think we need to do a really, better job as leaders and as companies to really start thinking about these people as people and setting them up for success and setting them up for, a pathway forward. Are some people just not going to be great at sales? Yeah. Right? Can you figure that out pretty quickly? Like most of the time, right? But a lot of sales processes are harder to pick up, and it might take 6 months, it might take 9 months to truly develop a rep, on your team so they can efficiently sell your products.
Yeah, I think to your point, like it's so important to break down those skills. I think that's too why I believe that companies are really going to appreciate what we're doing in that corporate space is breaking that skill set down and going, all right, like in the next 6 months, what are the small details of the sales process that we can improve on that would make all the world of difference for you, like in your company, right? Like versus going, hey, here's what does every company do? Here's the handbook. Read this whole Bible and then watch these videos, and hopefully you can sell something. Like that's not realistic. And yeah, you're gonna have to, but like think about it this way: you're gonna have natural salespeople that can just embrace anything. They can talk and they'll do well. But what about those individuals that if you just gave them more time and you help them identify those tiny skill sets, they may end up being some of your best people. And I think, like, again, we're doing a disservice. One of the questions I want to ask you was like the difference between, I don't know if there is a difference. I'm just kind of curious your thoughts, but like, do you see a difference between a sales leader and a sales coach? Like, what do you think the difference is there?
Yeah, I mean, I see a difference between like a sales manager and a sales supervisor and a sales coach. I mean, you can put manager and leader. I mean, we throw those words around so much. Absolutely,
Mm.
right? Like, I mean, I was very fortunate to where I had a couple mentors, and when we'd go into a conversation, right, and I was a student, I'd go into a conversation with them. The entire focus of that conversation was around me, how I'm doing, how I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, and those were the questions that were being asked, right? They really forced me to start thinking for myself. They really start thinking about what I'm doing, how those actions are actually, or how those, inputs or outputs are actually turning into those actions. I definitely think there is, right? And, I kind of alluded to it at the beginning of this, but like we're coaching a lot more, you know, to the metric and to those outputs, right? And we're not really talking about all those things that are going to actually lead to those outputs. And we're not actually forcing people to ask, to answer questions for themselves, right? And I think it goes back to a lot of the stuff that we're talking about. When I truly look at a coach, it's you don't always have to have all the answers and you don't have to give all the answers to your team members and to the people you're working with, but you should always have a question that will eventually become an answer to the problems that they're having, right? And I think too often we're having the take care of the problem at mind. We're in such a culture right now whether you have Slack, whether you have Salesforce, whether you have email, and it's just constantly just trying to, take care of one issue after another, after another, after another, after another, and you're not actually entering into these coaching conversations with your people, I definitely think there's a huge difference, right? Like I'm trying to get people to start thinking for themselves so they can be independent for themselves, so they can eventually become sales leaders within this company and organization, but eventually any organization they go to, right? If you teach somebody to think for themselves and how to fend for themselves, they're automatically going to start using those skills in each situation they come across. What unfortunately happens is a lot of these people who are top performers that become leaders were either never coached the right ways, or when they get into that situation, they think that they automatically have to do everything for that person. And we're not asking enough questions. We're not actually coaching them and actually, like I said, creating a safe space for them to fail, right? Because our metrics and our quotas and everything are, so big and so high in the sky from investors and different, people in the company. Like we have to get back to basics and tell people it's okay to struggle, it's okay to fail, it's okay to chip away for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks at a time on a problem. But you have to ask the questions to give them just the answer. It might get you through the month, right? But you're going to run into problems 2 months, 3 months later if this person's not actually thinking for themselves.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, and I think like the difference between for me like leadership versus coaching. I had a leader when I first got into sales who I wanted to be like him, and then you can have a coach where the coach will make you want to be the best version of you. So that's the way that I kind of look at it now. And again, this is something that I've been thinking a lot about because again, obviously as we develop, our consulting business, that's something that we're gonna have to articulate. But it's like if you have a sales leader, you're gonna have a bunch of people wanting to be like that person. Versus like, can you get a coach that makes you want to be the best version of yourself? And then the beauty of I think the coaching versus leadership is that you usually only have one leader, like on a team, like that's the leader of the team. But when you're a coach, you don't have to be the leader. You can have somebody else be the leader, but you're just the coach. But you have to remove some of the ego, I think, when it comes to that. But I think the one of the things that hopefully more with our help, hopefully more and more companies start to want to embrace this coaching culture where everyone's trying to be the best version of themselves and work on. And this is going to be the fun part of explaining to companies. Is like, look, I don't want to come in with the intention as a consulting company to even increase your numbers. What I care about is I want to help your people embrace the idea of mastering, like self-mastery. If we can get them to master the skill sets and take joy out of getting better every single day and getting better at the skill sets, the sales will increase. I think the problem is if I'm so focused on the outcome, I'm so focused on I need to make a sale, I need to do this, there's no skill development. And at the mention too, you're not going to, there's a reason why sales reps don't last very long in certain industries. And I think and this is just a theory, but it's my inclination that because they get stuck in what has worked in the past. Like I was talking to, I was doing a workshop for a company a little bit ago, and I was talking to them about embracing this consulting style of sale where like your job isn't to sell a product, your job is to make that company money. Like your job is to figure out how your product can make that company more money. Otherwise, what is the point of you, right? That's the whole point of you selling something, right? Is to make them more money. But in order to do that, you have to really understand their industry. You have to really understand what they want. You need to ask them. I asked this question. I was like, when's the last time you asked your customers or your prospects, what is it that you want for you? I don't mean your company, but for you. Like, what would make you feel like, you're successful? And they're like, we've never asked that question. Don't you think that's weird? Isn't that odd that you're selling them something that's hundreds of thousands of dollars, but you don't know what's in it for them? Like you've never considered that before. But some of these people have been in the industry so long and they're like, well, Raylan, why would I change? What I'm doing is working. Yeah, today. But here's the thing. Cause I was explaining to them the benefits of obviously like being online and those kind of things. And I go, what you're telling these people they can find anywhere. And they're like, no, Raylan. I've been in the industry for 20 years. No one has the information that I have. And I pulled up YouTube and I found this guy that gave a like 2-hour long explanation of this one product that could revolutionize their business. And he did it obviously for free online, had hundreds of thousands of views. And I go, how many leads do you think this guy got? And of those leads, how many do you want to bet because they watched the video and because they spent 2 hours with them are more likely to buy? And so they're like, oh, probably a lot. And it's like, okay, but you're still stuck over here because you think your way is the best. But I think if you embrace this coaching culture, and again, focus less on the results, because also there's this huge drop off that you see happen, right? Where like you'll be winning for a long time and you go through a drought. Okay, why did that happen? It was because you didn't work on the skill sets that got you there. You know what I mean? They dry up or changes. People change. How people bought yesterday is not the same that people are going to buy today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I would say, can you still hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. No, I'd say absolutely 100%. And I think too, just getting back to just putting people first, right? Just putting your environment, putting your culture first. Because we're going to come in, we're going to get results, we're going to help people, we're going to grow and advance the business, right? But it does have to start from the top down, and there has to be a clear intent to really care about somebody's personal development, right? Like I've been in and out of corporations for the last, 15 years. And like there are companies that I've been in and there's companies that I've consulted with. They truly do care about personal development. They just don't know which way to go or really, how to roll it out or really how to, roll it out with intent. And then there's companies that, talk about caring about it. But then after a couple weeks, something else happens that gets pushed to the side and people just have to get on board and just roll with it and just go with it. Because this is where the business is going, kind of a thing. But there's a couple times on this conversation you use the word ego, right? And ego is the thing that I see kill the most careers and kill the most companies. So when you really do talk about the coaching culture, it's starting them from the moment somebody walks in the door. It's having those conversations around who they are, what they want, why they're here, and making sure they're in the right place, right? What happens a lot of times is when you offer somebody a job, you bring them in, it's just like from a company standpoint, you're like, oh, I'm giving you the opportunity. You're lucky to be here. You're welcome, kind of a thing, right? And it's just like, okay, now go out there and prove yourself, right? And I think we just kind of have to shift our mindset from like the old school way of thinking is like, yeah, in sales, you are a number. You need to perform. You need to get better, and you need to do this to keep your job. Like that's an expectation. That's a fair expectation. You're in sales. You're driving a number, but it's not a fair expectation if I'm not coached properly. I'm not giving all the tools, and I'm not actually put in a position to be successful and put in a position to where I can actually take the training that you're giving me and actually mock that training and go have the exact same experience with somebody on the phone. And I think that's the biggest difference between, coaching and just being a manager is the way I'm asking you questions through a coaching session. You could almost copy what I just did on a sales call and have a pretty similar experience from somebody having an aha moment on the phone just by asking questions, right? But what happens with the ego is I want to tell a lot more than I want to ask, right? I want
Because it's
to be
faster.
an absolute authority. Yeah. I want to be an authority in the one-on-one conversation as a leader. I want to be an authority over my team. I want them to think that I'm the best, right? The ego comes into play, and you truly have to leave it at the door, right? Like there's no problem having an ego if you work your tail off and you know that you're working harder than somebody else and that's why you're better. But when your ego trips you up and it's the biggest cause as far as why people will move with you and not move with you, like there's an issue and there's a problem. Just real quick, before we finish up, I was doing a sales call with somebody, over the last week, and super successful business, super successful company. I think they're doing 50 to 100 million a year in revenue. And I'm on the phone with the CEO, and they straight up said, "It's like I know my business better than anybody. Nobody can tell me anything about my business that I don't already know." Right, and this business was passed down from family generation, so on and so forth. So I think he was the second or third owner, if I recall properly, right? But like that struck me as extremely odd as somebody running a 50 to $100 million revenue company, right? Because it's like coming in there, it's like, no, it's like I might not know your niche as well as you do. I might not know exactly what you're doing from like an industry standpoint as much as you. There's so much you can teach me and so much I can learn from you. I know my bones, like you can teach me so many different things, right? But to think that there's not one thing that an employee sitting in your seat can't teach you, or that has not seen that you haven't seen, that's sitting at their desk right now on the phones for you or in customer service or whatever the role is, like you don't think there's not one thing that an employee in your company right now could teach you about your business that you might not see, right? And that's one of those like top down ways of thinking, um, because there's always somebody who sees something you don't see, and the minute the people running the organization or running the company don't feel like they can develop, don't think they can learn more, like believe it or not, people can feel that across the organization. It is felt. There is an energy that goes with it. And that's really alarming when you see something like that. And that's a huge company with 1,000+ employees. Um, so like that's why what we're doing is going to be so important for so many companies, whether you're a big player or whether you're just starting out. Like you want to develop that culture where everybody has a voice. It's an entire collaboration, because all your leaders in your company were eventually sitting entry level at that company or another company before they were leaders, right? So you can either help
Yeah.
groom, right? You can either help groom positive experiences for your company and other companies, or you can be one of those companies that groom negative experience for your company and other companies.
Yeah. And again, I think that's why we're gonna do more change the sales kind of fear than most programs, or it's simply because, like, again, if you can develop a culture that naturally sees their own problems
Mm-hmm.
and seeks out coaching from others, like there's no stop to how far the company can really grow. But the last
Mm-hmm.
question I want to ask you, I've been asking this pretty much of every guest because I'm always interested in what people are working on. But what are you working on right now to improve? Whether it's your own leadership or whether that's your just personal life, but what are you working on now to improve on?
Yeah. Yeah, great question. What I'd say is, you can't preach personal development unless you're not going through it as well, right? So, just, being a part of, several different groups and several different, coaching and mentor, programs, right? Where I'm able to give a lot of my experience and give a lot of coaching, but I'm also, able to receive a lot of different, things from a lot of different people that have, different twists or different interactions or different situations. Your stories are completely different than mine, even though there's some similarity, right? But it's listening to that and understanding, really building up, my empathy. I'd say one thing that I've really gone back to a lot is, reading, what books I'm picking up and what books I'm actually picking up with, intent's a big thing, that for me, not just doing something, but listening with intent, doing something with intent. So not just picking up random books and reading it, but what's something very specific and what's something very specific within that message that's going to help me personally connect more with the people I'm going to connect with. It's in what I'd say too is, something big as well is it's just rooms you're surrounding yourself with and the people you're surrounding yourself with. What boundaries you're setting and, who you're allowing into your life at, what times, and trying to keep it as positive as possible. So the biggest things I'm working on right now is, having more conversations, having deeper conversations, around business and around what I'm doing and around, how I'm helping, but also making sure too that, I'm having a lot of conversations around, health as well. Going back to, how do I want to show up, right? I want to show up for the people I'm coaching and helping, my best self. And I can't do that if I'm not, personally developing myself, reading, talking to other people, and eating better and working on a daily basis.
All right, I love it. Again, I like asking that question just because, again, like just to show some of the listeners as well, like it doesn't really matter where you're at. Like you always have to be improving on something.
Hmm.
Mine changed like I think just about every single week, but
Yeah.
but yeah, man. Thanks for
And it
coming on,
does,
man. I
right?
know that people that are listening are gonna get something out of it, and then
Yeah, man. No, definitely appreciate you having me. Excited to link up and do a lot more of this in the near future.
all right, man. Well, I'll talk to you soon, and thank you all for listening.